The little girl's fingers were blue when she grabbed his coat. Mason Reed, billionaire, CEO, a man who controlled half of Manhattan's skyline, froze. Not from the December wind cutting through Park Avenue, but from what she whispered, "Please, mister, my mommy won't wake up." 4 years old, maybe 5, tears turning to ice on her cheeks. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness between those crumbling buildings, a mother lay dying. And Mason, who'd spent a decade building walls around his heart, was about to have every single one of them shattered by a child he'd never met before. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now let me tell you what happened next. The Cartier watch on Mason's wrist read 11:47 p.m. when his life stopped making sense. He'd just left the Waldorf, where he'd spent 3 hours in a private dining room, convincing a group of Japanese investors that his latest project, a mixed-use tower in Hell's Kitchen, was worth their $200 million. The meeting had gone well. It always did. Mason Reed didn't do failure. At 32, he'd built Reed Global Properties from a single Brooklyn brownstone into an empire that reshaped city skylines. Forbes had put him on their cover last month. The headline called him the man who never stops building. What they didn't know was that building was all he had left. The snow had started around 9, and now it was coming down hard, the kind of snow that made yellow cabs disappear and turned Fifth Avenue into something almost beautiful. Mason's driver was circling the block. He'd texted 5 minutes ago, but Mason had waved him off, told him to take the long way. He wanted to walk, needed to walk. The whiskey from the meeting sat warm in his chest, and the cold air felt good against his face. He pulled his overcoat tighter and headed south on Park, toward the office. He had contracts to review, emails from London and Singapore waiting, another meeting at 7 a.m. with his attorneys about the zoning dispute in Tribeca. Sleep was optional. Sleep had been optional for years. That's when he heard it. "Mister." The voice was so small he almost missed it under the sound of wind and distant traffic. He kept walking. "Mister, please." Mason stopped, turned. She was standing in the middle of the sidewalk about 10 feet behind him, snow gathering on her shoulders. A little girl in a pink jacket that was too thin for December, no hat, no gloves. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and she was shaking, from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "You lost?" Mason asked, glancing around for parents, a nanny, anyone. The street was empty, just storefronts with metal gates pulled down and the occasional car pushing through the snow. The girl took a step toward him. Her shoes were soaked through, he noticed. Sneakers with cartoon characters on them, falling apart at the seams. "My mommy," she said, and her voice cracked. "My mommy won't wake up." Mason felt something cold that had nothing to do with the weather move through his chest. He crouched down to her level, ignoring the snow soaking into his $1,000 slacks. "Where's your mommy, sweetheart?" "Home." She pointed east toward the darker blocks beyond Park Avenue, where the buildings got shorter and the streetlights got dimmer. "She's sleeping, but she won't talk to me, and I'm scared." "Okay." Mason's mind was already moving, cataloging options. Call 911, find a cop. His driver would be back in 3 minutes. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Emma, I'm Mason. We're going to help your mom, okay? But I need you to, now." Her eyes were enormous, brown and wet with tears. "Please, mister. She's really cold." Something in her voice, the way it broke on that last word, made the decision for him. "Show me," he said. She grabbed his hand. Her fingers were ice. They moved through the snow like ghosts, the little girl pulling Mason east on 38th, then south on Lexington, into neighborhoods he knew only from development reports and crime statistics. The buildings here were pre-war walk-ups with cracked facades and fire escapes that looked like they'd collapse if you sneezed on them. Not the kind of real estate Mason dealt with. Not the kind of real estate anyone with money dealt with. Emma didn't talk as they walked. She just held his hand with both of hers and pulled him forward, her small legs working hard through the snow. Mason tried his phone twice, once to call 911, once to text his driver, but the signal kept cutting out. The storm, probably. Or maybe this part of the city was just forgotten enough that the cell towers didn't care. "How much further?" he asked. "There." She pointed at a building mid-block, a 5-story brick structure that looked like it had given up somewhere around 1985. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Half the windows on the second floor were covered with cardboard. Mason hesitated. Every instinct he'd developed over a decade of navigating Manhattan real estate was screaming at him to stop, to call the police, to let professionals handle this. He didn't belong here. He belonged in boardrooms and penthouse restaurants and the back seats of town cars. But Emma was already pulling him toward the entrance, and those instincts, the loud ones that had made him rich, were suddenly drowned out by something quieter. Something he hadn't felt in years. The building smelled like mildew and boiled cabbage. The hallway was dark, one bulb flickering weakly near the stairs. Mason could hear a TV playing somewhere above them, voices shouting in Spanish, a baby crying. "Third floor," Emma whispered. The stairs creaked under Mason's weight. The banister was loose, wobbling when he grabbed it. He thought about tetanus shots and structural inspections, and how his attorneys would react if he told them where he was right now. Emma stopped at a door marked 3C. The paint was peeling, showing 3 different colors underneath: green, yellow, beige, like an archaeological dig of bad landlord decisions. "Mommy's inside," she said. Mason tried the handle. Locked. "You have a key, Emma?" She shook her head. "Mommy has it, but I came out the window." She pointed to a door at the end of the hall marked Fire Exit. "The stairs outside go to our window. It's broken, so it opens." Christ. Mason followed her to the fire exit, down a metal staircase that swayed in the wind, to a window with a cracked pane and a lock that didn't catch. He pushed it open and helped Emma climb through, then pulled himself after her, his coat catching on the frame. They were in a kitchen, small, smaller than Mason's walk-in closet. There was a card table with 2 chairs, a refrigerator humming loudly, cabinets with doors that didn't quite close. A child's drawing was stuck to the fridge with a magnet, a house, a tree, 2 stick figures holding hands. "She's in here," Emma said, moving toward the doorway. The apartment's main room was barely big enough for the second-hand couch and television. There was a twin mattress on the floor in the corner, covered with a princess blanket. A small space heater glowed orange in the corner, doing nothing against the cold seeping through the walls. And on the floor, next to the couch, was the woman. She was lying on her side, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something. Late 20s, maybe 30, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore scrubs, the kind nurses or medical assistants wore, and her face was pale, too pale, with a sheen of sweat across her forehead despite the cold. Mason was across the room in 3 steps, kneeling beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but weak, thready. Her breathing was shallow. "Mommy?" Emma's voice was tiny. "Is she okay?" Mason pulled out his phone, still no signal. Damn it! He looked around the room, really looked this time. The coffee table was covered in papers, bills, most of them stamped with red overdue notices. Con Ed, Verizon. Something from a hospital with a number that made Mason's stomach turn. There was a pill bottle on the floor near the woman's hand, cap off, empty. He picked it up. Insulin. "When did she fall down, Emma?" "I don't know." The little girl was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "I was watching TV and then she said she felt funny and then she was on the floor and I tried to wake her up but she wouldn't wake up and I got scared so I went outside to find help but nobody would stop and then I saw you." "Okay, hey, it's okay." Mason reached for her, pulled her close. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "You did good, Emma. You did really good. I'm going to help your mom, okay? But I need you to do something for me." She nodded against his coat. "I need you to go knock on a neighbor's door, any door. Tell them your mom is sick and we need to call an ambulance. Can you do that?" Another nod. "Go, fast." Emma ran. Mason turned back to the woman, Emma's mother. He checked her pulse again, lifted one of her eyelids. Her pupils were dilated, unresponsive. Diabetic shock, probably. He'd seen it once before, years ago, when a secretary in his office had collapsed during a board meeting. But that had been in a building with a medical team on call and an ambulance 5 minutes away. Here, he had nothing. He grabbed the couch cushions, propped them under her feet, trying to remember the first aid course his assistant had made him take 3 years ago. Keep the victim warm, monitor breathing, don't move them unless absolutely necessary. The apartment was freezing. He looked at the space heater, then at the wall outlet. It was overloaded. 3 extension cords daisy-chained together, powering the heater, the TV, a lamp. A fire waiting to happen. He shrugged off his overcoat, spread it over the woman's body. It was cashmere, imported from Italy, worth about 3 months of rent in this building. It didn't matter. Emma came back, breathless. Mrs. Rodriguez called 911. She says they're coming. Good girl. Mason pulled her close again, felt her small body pressed against his side. They'll be here soon. Is Mommy going to die? The question hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked him something that mattered this much? No, he said, and he made it sound certain, absolute, even though he had no idea if it was true. Your mom's going to be fine. Emma buried her face in his shirt and didn't let go. Tisn't. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Mason stayed on the floor with Emma curled up against him, one hand on her mother's wrist, counting the pulse beats, whispering to the woman even though she couldn't hear him. You've got a brave kid, he told her. She saved your life tonight. You hear me? She went out in a snowstorm and found help. So you've got to stick around, okay? You've got to wake up. When the boots thundered up the stairs and the paramedics burst through the door, Mason felt Emma flinch. It's okay, he told her. They're here to help. The team moved fast. Vitals, IV line, glucose check. Mason heard numbers that sounded bad, medical terms he didn't understand. They got her on a gurney, strapped her down, moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing this every night. Severe hypoglycemia, one of them said to his partner. Probable DKA. We need to move. Wait. Mason stood up, Emma still attached to him like a barnacle. Where are you taking her? Mount Sinai Beth Israel. The paramedic was already heading for the door. You family? Mason looked down at Emma, at her tear-stained face and terrified eyes. Yes, he lied. Then come on. They rode in the ambulance, Emma on Mason's lap, both of them pressed into the corner while the paramedics worked on her mother. The sirens were deafening. Emma had her hands over her ears, her face buried in Mason's chest again. He wrapped his arms around her and watched the woman on the gurney, Clara, according to the ID card one of the paramedics had pulled from her purse, being brought back from wherever she'd gone. The glucose worked fast. By the time they pulled up to the emergency bay, Clara's eyes were fluttering open. She tried to speak, couldn't. One of the paramedics leaned close. You're okay, ma'am. You're at the hospital. You had a hypoglycemic episode. We're going to take care of you. Her eyes found Emma. Found Mason holding her daughter. The confusion on her face turned to panic. Emma! The word came out slurred. My baby? She's fine, Mason said quickly. She's right here. She's safe. Who? Clara tried to sit up, couldn't. The straps held her down. Who are you? The gurney was already moving, wheeled by nurses who'd appeared from nowhere. Mason followed, Emma still in his arms. I'm Mason. Your daughter found me. She asked for help. But Clara wasn't listening. She was reaching for Emma, her hand shaking, IV line swaying. Baby, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ma'am, you need to stay calm, one of the nurses said. We need to get you stabilized. Emma? They pushed through double doors into the ER. Mason tried to follow, but a security guard stepped in front of him. Family only beyond this point. Mason stopped. He wasn't family. He was a stranger who'd followed a little girl through the snow. Her daughter. We'll take care of her, the guard said, not unkindly. You can wait in the lobby. The doors swung shut. Emma started screaming. Bumps. The waiting room was fluorescent bright and crowded with the kind of misery that only emergency rooms see at midnight. A man with a bloody towel wrapped around his hand. A woman rocking a feverish baby. 2 cops standing near the vending machines talking in low voices. Mason sat in an orange plastic chair with Emma on his lap, her face buried in his shoulder, her small body racked with sobs. She's going to be okay, he kept saying. The doctors are helping her. She's going to be okay. But Emma wouldn't stop crying, and people were starting to stare. And Mason realized he had absolutely no idea what to do. He'd raised a son. Ethan was 7 now, living with Mason in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, attended by a nanny and a housekeeper, and occasionally by Mason himself when work allowed. But Ethan had never been like this. Ethan had never been scared or messy or inconsolable. Ethan had been raised by professionals. Emma was just a kid who needed her mom. Hey. Mason shifted her slightly so he could see her face. Emma, look at me. She didn't. Emma. Finally, those brown eyes met his. They were red and swollen and completely shattered. Your mom is strong, okay? She's going to be fine, but she needs you to be strong too. Can you do that? Emma's lip trembled. I want my mommy. I know, but we have to wait a little bit, so how about this? You tell me about your mom. What's she like? It was a desperate move, something to distract her, but Emma latched onto it like a lifeline. She's nice, Emma whispered. She makes really good pancakes, and she sings songs when I go to bed. Yeah, what kind of songs? Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. There's one about sunshine and one about stars. I don't know all the words. She sounds like a good mom. She is. Fresh tears spilled over. She works a lot. At the restaurant. She says she has to work so we can have money for food and stuff. But I don't care about food. I just want her to come home. Mason felt something crack in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a long time. How old are you, Emma? 4, almost 5. My birthday is in March. 4 years old. And she'd gone out into a snowstorm alone because her mother had collapsed and there was no one else to help. 4 years old, and she'd known exactly what to do. You're very brave, Mason said quietly. I was really scared. Brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. Emma studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Then she leaned back against his chest and closed her eyes. They waited. At some point, Mason's phone buzzed. His driver, asking where he was. Mason texted back a brief explanation. Emergency. Go home. And turned the phone off. At some point, a nurse came out and asked if he was Emma's father. He said no. She asked if he was a relative. He said no again. She gave him a look that suggested he should probably leave, but then Emma stirred in his arms and whimpered, Mommy? And the nurse's expression softened. We'll update you when we can, she said. At some point, Emma fell asleep. Just passed out mid-sentence, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Mason held her carefully, trying not to move, his arms going numb. He looked down at her small face, peaceful now, and thought about Ethan safe in his bed across town. When was the last time he'd held his son like this? When was the last time Ethan had needed him like this? He couldn't remember. At 2:17 a.m., a doctor emerged from the ER doors, young, exhausted, with the kind of steady calm that came from seeing worse things than this. Clara Diaz's family? Mason stood carefully, Emma still asleep in his arms. How is she? Stable. We've got her blood sugar regulated and we're running fluids. She's going to be okay, but she'll need to stay for observation. Maybe a couple of days. The doctor paused. She asked about her daughter. She's here, sleeping. The doctor looked at Emma, then at Mason, and something unspoken passed between them. You're not the father. No. But you brought them in. Her daughter found me, asked for help. The doctor nodded slowly. We see this sometimes. Parents working themselves to death, skipping meals, rationing insulin because they can't afford refills. She's lucky the kid knew what to do. Mason felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. Can I see her? He asked. Clara, just for a minute. Emma will want to know she's okay. The doctor hesitated, then shrugged. 5 minutes. Room 7. Clara was awake, barely, when Mason pushed through the curtain. She was hooked up to monitors and IV lines, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face still too pale but no longer gray. Her eyes found him immediately, then dropped to Emma asleep in his arms. She okay? Clara's voice was rough. She's fine, tired. Mason moved closer, lowering himself carefully into the chair beside the bed. You gave her a scare. I gave her... Clara's eyes filled with tears. I gave myself a scare. I don't remember much. Just feeling dizzy and then nothing. Low blood sugar. The paramedic said you probably skipped too many meals. Clara looked away. Yeah. Emma said you work at a restaurant. 2 restaurants, and I pick up catering shifts when I can. She was still staring at the wall, her jaw tight. It's not enough. It's never enough. The insulin alone costs $300 a month, and that's with the discount program, and Her voice broke. I can't afford to get sick. I don't have time to get sick. Mason didn't say anything. What could he say? That he'd spent $300 on a bottle of wine at dinner tonight? That his watch cost more than her yearly rent? Emma's a brave kid, he said instead. That brought Clara's eyes back to him, sharp now, defensive. She's 4 years old. She shouldn't have to be brave. She should have a mother who doesn't collapse on the kitchen floor. You're doing the best you can. My best isn't good enough. The tears spilled over now, running down her temples into her hair. She went outside alone, in the snow. She could have frozen to death. She could have gotten hit by a car. She could have... A sob cut her off. Mason shifted Emma in his arms, stood up, moved to the side of the bed, where Clara could see her daughter's sleeping face. But she didn't, he said quietly. She found help. She saved your life, and now you're both going to be okay. Clara reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched Emma's hair. The gentleness of that gesture, the sheer exhausted love in it, hit Mason harder than anything had in years. I don't even know your name, Clara whispered. Mason Reed. Recognition flickered across her face. Reed. Like Reed Global Properties? Yeah. She pulled her hand back, something shuddering behind her eyes. Of course, I should have known. The coat, the suit. She laughed, but it was bitter. What were you even doing in my neighborhood? Slumming? I was walking home from a meeting. Emma found me. Lucky her. Clara turned her face away again. Look, I appreciate what you did. Really? But we'll be fine now. You can go back to your penthouse or wherever you live. I'm sure you have important billionaire things to do. Mason should have left. She was giving him an out. A clean exit from a situation that had nothing to do with him. But Emma shifted in his arms, making a small sound in her sleep, and he thought about that apartment with the broken window and the overloaded outlets and the empty insulin bottle on the floor. When they release you, he said, where are you going? Home. To that apartment with no heat and bills you can't pay? Clara's jaw clenched. It's none of your business. You're right, it's not. Mason sat back down, Emma's weight solid in his arms. But I'm making it my business. Why? Clara's eyes were fierce now, burning with something between anger and desperation. Why do you care? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Mason looked down at Emma's sleeping face, thought about how she'd grabbed his hand with frozen fingers and whispered, please. Thought about how she'd asked if her mother was going to die with the kind of raw terror no 4-year-old should ever have to feel. I don't know, he admitted, but I do. Before Clara could respond, the curtain pulled back and a woman in a blazer stepped through. Mid-40s, carrying a tablet, with the kind of efficient sympathy that meant bad news was coming. Ms. Diaz, I'm Jennifer Martin from Child Services. Mason felt Clara go rigid in the bed. We were notified about your situation, Jennifer continued, her voice gentle but firm. A 4-year-old child found outside alone at midnight in a snowstorm while her mother was incapacitated. I'm sure you understand that raises some concerns. She went to get help, but Clara's voice was shaking. I didn't send her out there. I was unconscious. I understand that, but we need to ensure Emma's safety while you recover. Do you have family in the city? Someone who can take care of her? No. Friends? A support network? Clara's silence was answer enough. Jennifer tapped something on her tablet. Then I'm afraid we'll need to place Emma in temporary foster care until you're released and we can conduct a home evaluation. No. Clara tried to sit up, grimaced at the pain. You can't take my daughter, please. She's all I have. It's temporary, Ms. Diaz, just until we can... She stays with me. The voice that cut through the room was Mason's, cold, absolute. The voice he used in boardrooms when negotiations weren't going his way. Both women turned to look at him. Excuse me, Jennifer said. Emma stays with me. I have a 3-bedroom penthouse on the Upper East Side, a full-time housekeeper, and a nanny on staff. She'll be safe, fed, and cared for until her mother is released. Mr. Reed, I appreciate the offer, but child services protocol is. I don't care about protocol. Mason stood, still holding Emma, and the full force of his attention landed on Jennifer like a spotlight. You want to ensure this child's safety? Fine. I'm ensuring it. Run whatever background checks you need. Call my attorneys. They'll have everything on your desk in an hour, but you're not putting her in the system. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. And what's your relationship to the child? I'm the man who brought her and her mother to the hospital. I'm the man who's going to make sure she doesn't spend tonight in a group home with strangers while her mother fights to stay conscious. Mr. Reed, one night, Mason said, his voice dropping lower. Give me one night. If you still want to place her tomorrow, we'll talk. But tonight, she stays with me. The room was silent. Clara was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Jennifer was calculating, weighing protocols against the reality of a billionaire who clearly wasn't backing down. Finally, Jennifer sighed. I'll need to make some calls. Make them. She left. Mason sat back down, Emma still asleep against his chest, and found Clara watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Mason didn't have a good answer. He'd asked himself the same question 6 times since the paramedics arrived. Because someone should, he said. Clara closed her eyes. A single tear slipped out. Thank you, she breathed. At 4:30 a.m., after Jennifer had made her calls and run her checks and reluctantly agreed to a temporary overnight placement, Mason carried Emma out of the hospital into the pre-dawn cold. The snow had stopped. The city was quiet, suspended in that strange moment between night and morning when everything feels possible. His driver pulled up. Mason had called him back, and Mason slid into the back seat with Emma still asleep in his arms. She stirred slightly as the car started moving, mumbled something about pancakes, then settled back against him. Mason looked out at the city passing by, the buildings he owned, the skyline he'd helped build, the empire he'd spent a decade constructing. None of it had prepared him for this. Where to, Mr. Reed? His driver asked. Mason thought about his penthouse, about Ethan asleep in his room, about the nanny who would wake in a few hours and find a 4-year-old girl she'd never met eating breakfast at the table. Home, he said. And for the first time in years, the word actually meant something. The penthouse was dark when they arrived, just the ambient glow of the city filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mason carried Emma through the foyer, marble floors, abstract art on the walls, a crystal chandelier that cost more than most people made in a year, and felt suddenly, acutely aware of how ridiculous all of it was. Emma stirred as he nudged open the guest room door with his shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the expensive furniture, the silk curtains. Where's my mommy? Her voice was small, frightened. At the hospital, remember? She's getting better. But you're going to stay with me tonight, okay? Just until she's all better. Emma's lip trembled. I want to go home. Mason sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding her. I know, but your mom needs to rest, and she wants to make sure you're safe and warm, so we're going to have a sleepover here. Have you ever had a sleepover? She shook her head. Well, they're pretty fun. You get to sleep in a big, comfortable bed, and in the morning we'll have breakfast. Whatever you want. Pancakes, maybe? Mommy makes pancakes. Then we'll make them just like your mommy does. Emma looked around the room again, her eyes landing on the window where the city stretched out below them, a million lights twinkling in the darkness. We're really high up. 23rd floor. I can see everything. She leaned forward slightly, pressing her face against Mason's chest, but keeping her eyes on the view. Are we in the sky? Almost. For a moment, she seemed to forget her fear, mesmerized by the lights. Then her stomach growled, loud in the quiet room, and she looked up at him with embarrassed eyes. When did you last eat? Mason asked. I had crackers. Before Mommy fell down. Crackers. Christ. Come on, he said, standing up with her still in his arms. Let's find you some real food. The kitchen was all stainless steel and granite, designed by some celebrity chef he'd hired and never used. Mason set Emma down on one of the bar stools and opened the refrigerator, confronted immediately by the reality that he had no idea what 4-year-olds ate. There was leftover Thai from 3 days ago, half a rotisserie chicken, some fancy cheese his housekeeper bought, a drawer full of vegetables he'd never touched. "Do you like chicken?" he asked. Emma nodded. He pulled out the chicken, found some bread, made what had to be the world's most expensive chicken sandwich. Emma ate it in about 4 bites, barely chewing, and Mason realized she wasn't just hungry. She was starving. "More?" he offered. "Yes, please." He made another sandwich. She ate that one slower, her legs swinging from the stool, her eyes taking in every detail of the kitchen. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. "No, my son lives here too. Ethan. He's 7. "Where is he?" "Sleeping." Mason glanced at the clock on the microwave. 5:03 a.m. "You'll meet him in the morning." "Is he nice?" "Yeah, he's a good kid." Mason paused, realizing he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. When was the last time he'd had a real conversation with Ethan? When was the last time they'd done anything together besides awkward weekend breakfasts between business calls? Emma finished her sandwich and yawned, the adrenaline finally draining out of her small body. Her eyes were starting to close again, her head drooping forward. "Okay, bedtime for real this time," Mason said, lifting her off the stool. She didn't protest, just wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her back to the guest room. He tucked her into the bed, sheets that probably had a thread count higher than her entire apartment's square footage, and pulled the duvet up to her chin. She looked impossibly small in the king-sized bed, a tiny, dark-haired girl surrounded by white pillows. "Will you stay?" she whispered. "Just until I fall asleep?" Mason hesitated. He had emails to answer, contracts to review, a meeting in less than 3 hours that he should probably prepare for. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay." He sat down in the armchair by the window and watched Emma's breathing slow, her body finally relaxing into sleep. The city hummed below them, oblivious and endless, and Mason sat there in the dark, holding vigil over a child he'd met 6 hours ago and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. When her breathing turned deep and even, he stood to leave, made it 3 steps before her voice stopped him. "Mason?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for helping my mommy." He didn't trust himself to speak, just nodded in the darkness and slipped out of the room. The apartment was silent except for the ambient noise of the city. Mason poured himself a whiskey from the bar in his study, stood at the window watching the sun start to bleed into the eastern sky. His reflection stared back at him, still in his suit from the meeting, wrinkled now, stained with Emma's tears and hospital antiseptic. He looked tired, older than 32. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant, Catherine. "Morning briefing at 7. Conference call with Singapore at 8. Lunch with the Times reporter at 12:30. Don't forget the zoning board meeting at 4. Right. His actual life. The one that didn't include 4-year-old girls and diabetic mothers and late-night sandwiches. He typed back, "Cancel everything before noon." Something came up. Catherine's response was immediate. "Everything? Everything. Are you okay?" Mason looked back at the guest room door, thought about Emma sleeping in there, afraid and alone except for a stranger who'd promised to keep her safe. "No idea," he typed. Then he turned off his phone and went to take a shower. The hot water felt good, washing away the hospital smell and the snow and the weight of the night. But it didn't wash away the image of Clara lying on that floor, or Emma's blue fingers grabbing his coat, or the stack of overdue bills on that coffee table. He got out, dressed in jeans and a sweater, casual clothes he barely wore, and went to check on Emma. Still asleep. Good. Then he made the mistake of looking in on Ethan. His son's room was immaculate, organized. The bed made with military precision, toys arranged on shelves by size and color, homework stacked neatly on the desk. Ethan was curled up under his navy blue comforter, dark hair sticking up, breathing quietly. 7 years old. Mason's entire world, supposedly. Except Mason couldn't remember the last time he'd tucked Ethan in. Couldn't remember the last time Ethan had asked him to stay until he fell asleep. He closed the door quietly and went to make coffee. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, arrived at 6:30 like always, her key turning in the lock, her efficient footsteps moving through the foyer. She found Mason in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like it held answers. "Mr. Reed." She stopped short, taking in his casual clothes, the early hour, the fact that he was actually in the kitchen. "You're home." Observant as always, Mrs. Chen. She set down her purse, her eyes already cataloging details. The dirty plate in the sink, the bread left out on the counter, the sense that something was off. "We have a guest," Mason said. "A little girl, 4 years old. She's sleeping in the guest room." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change, but Mason could see the questions forming. She'd worked for him for 5 years and had probably seen stranger things. Probably. "She'll need clothes," he continued. "Kid stuff. Toys, maybe. I don't know what 4-year-old girls like. Can you handle that?" "Of course. How long is she staying?" "I don't know." Mrs. Chen nodded once. "I'll make breakfast. Does she have any allergies?" "No idea." "Dietary restrictions?" "Mrs. Chen, I know approximately nothing about this kid except that she likes pancakes and her mother is in the hospital. So just use your judgment." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Mrs. Chen's face. "Understood." She moved past him, already pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, and Mason felt a wave of gratitude for her unflappable competence. At least someone in this apartment knew what they were doing. He took his coffee to the living room and sank into the leather couch, finally letting himself feel the exhaustion. He'd been awake for almost 24 hours. His eyes burned, his body ached, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying the night. Emma's face in the snow, Claire's hand reaching for her daughter, the social worker's skeptical eyes. "Dad?" Mason looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway wearing pajamas with baseballs on them, his hair a mess, his eyes confused. "Hey, buddy, you're up early." "Mrs. Chen woke me up. She said we have a visitor." Ethan moved closer, cautious. He was always cautious around Mason, like he wasn't quite sure how to act. "Who is it?" "A little girl named Emma. She's going to stay with us for a bit." "Why?" "Her mom's sick. She needs somewhere safe to stay." Ethan processed this, his 7-year-old brain working through the logistics. "Is she nice?" "Yeah, she's scared, though. So we need to be nice to her, okay?" "Okay." Ethan sat down on the couch, keeping distance between himself and Mason. Always that distance. "Is her mom going to die?" The question caught Mason off guard. No, she's going to be fine." "How do you know?" "Because the doctors said so." Ethan didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. They sat in silence, father and son, both staring at nothing. "When's the last time you visited Mom?" Ethan asked quietly. Mason felt something tighten in his chest. Ethan's mother, Sarah, lived in Connecticut now with her new husband and their twin daughters. She'd left Mason 4 years ago, tired of being married to a man who loved buildings more than people. The divorce had been civil, expensive, and absolutely deserved. "I don't visit your mom, Ethan. You know that." "Why not?" "Because we're not married anymore." "But you were. You loved her once, right?" Mason looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something that broke his heart. Hope. Ethan was hoping for a different answer, hoping for evidence that people who loved each other didn't just stop. "Yeah," Mason said. "I loved her once." "What happened?" "I worked too much. She got tired of waiting for me to come home." "Do you regret it?" Christ, when did 7-year-olds get so perceptive? "Every day," Mason admitted. Ethan seemed to accept this. He picked at a thread on the couch, not looking at his father. "Mrs. Chen says the girl's mom is poor." "Yeah." "Are we going to help them?" "I'm trying to." "Good." Ethan stood up, started to walk away, then turned back. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're home." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Then Ethan was gone, padding back toward the kitchen, and Mason was alone with the weight of everything he'd been getting wrong. Breakfast was chaos in a way Mason's apartment had never experienced. Emma woke up at 7, confused and frightened until she remembered where she was. Mrs. Chen coaxed her into the kitchen with promises of pancakes, and Ethan approached her like she was a small animal that might bite. "Hi," Emma said, shy. "Hi," Ethan said back. Then they just stared at each other while Mrs. Chen flipped pancakes, and Mason drank more coffee and wondered if this was how normal families functioned. "I'm Ethan." "I'm Emma." "Do you like Legos?" Emma's face lit up. "I've never played with Legos." Ethan looked at her like she'd just said she'd never seen the sun. Never? We don't have any. Mommy says they're too expensive. Something passed across Ethan's face, understanding, maybe, or pity, and then he grabbed Emma's hand. Come on, I'll show you mine. They disappeared into Ethan's room, and Mason heard excited voices, the sound of boxes being opened, plastic bricks scattering across the floor. Well, Mrs. Chen said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of him. That's something. Yeah. Are you going to tell me what's actually going on? Mason cut into the pancakes, not tasting them. Her mother collapsed. The kid came and found me on the street. I brought them to the hospital. Social services was going to put Emma in foster care. So you volunteered to take her instead? Yeah. Mrs. Chen sat down across from him, studying his face with the kind of directness that only people who'd known you for years could manage. That doesn't sound like you. I know. The Mr. Reed I know doesn't get involved. He writes checks to charity galas and moves on. Well, maybe that's the problem. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow but didn't push. She just stood up, started cleaning dishes, and said, The girl needs clothes. I'll take her shopping this afternoon if you'd like. Thank you. And her mother? When is she being released? I don't know, a couple days maybe. And then what? Mason didn't have an answer for that. The morning passed in a strange blur. Emma and Ethan built elaborate Lego structures in Ethan's room while Mason fielded increasingly frantic calls from Catherine. The Singapore deal is falling apart, she said, her voice tight. They want to talk to you directly. Tell them I'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late. Then it's too late. Silence on the other end, then, Mason, what is going on with you? I'm taking a personal day, Catherine. People do that. You've never taken a personal day. You came to work with the flu last year. Well, maybe I'm turning over a new leaf. Are you dying? Is that what this is? Despite everything, Mason laughed. No, Catherine, I'm not dying. Then what? He looked toward Ethan's room where he could hear Emma giggling at something Ethan had said, a sound his apartment had never held before. I'm trying to figure something out, he said. I'll call you later. He hung up before she could protest. At 11, his lawyer called. Richard Preston, senior partner at Preston and Associates, the firm that handled all of Reed Global's legal affairs. His voice had the practiced calm of a man who'd seen everything. Mason, I got a very interesting call this morning from Child Protective Services. Yeah, I figured you would. They ran a background check on you. Want to make sure you're not harboring any secret criminal tendencies. And? You're clean, obviously, but they're concerned about the living arrangement. They want to do a home visit. Today. Mason rubbed his eyes. Fine. When? 2:00. And Mason, they're going to ask questions about your relationship with the child and her mother, about your intentions. You need to have good answers. What constitutes a good answer? The truth usually helps. Richard paused. What exactly are your intentions here? Mason thought about that apartment with the broken window, about Clara working herself to death at 2 restaurants, about Emma going outside alone in a snowstorm because there was no one else. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'm not letting them go back to that. Back to what? To barely surviving. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Be careful, Mason. Savior complexes get complicated. I'm not trying to save anyone. Then what are you trying to do? I told you, I don't know. After he hung up, Mason stood at the window and watched the city move below him. People hurrying to meetings, to appointments, to lives that made sense. He should be down there with them. Should be in his office, managing his empire, doing what he was good at. Instead, he was here, watching 2 kids build Lego towers, waiting for social workers to judge whether he was fit to harbor someone else's child. At noon, Mrs. Chen made grilled cheese sandwiches. Emma ate hers carefully, cutting it into small pieces, chewing slowly like she was afraid it might disappear. Ethan ate his in 3 bites and immediately asked for another. You can have more if you want, Mason told Emma. There's plenty of food. She looked at him with those big brown eyes, assessing whether this was a trick. Really? Really? She took another half sandwich, and Mason felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. After lunch, Emma asked if she could call her mother. Mason set her up on the couch with his phone, the number for Mount Sinai already dialed. "Mommy?" Emma's voice was small. "Are you okay?" Mason couldn't hear Claire's response, but he watched Emma's face relax, some of the fear draining away. "I'm at Mason's house. It's really big. And there's a boy named Ethan, and he has so many Legos, and I had pancakes and grilled cheese, and—" She stopped, listening. "Okay, I will. I love you too. Bye." She handed the phone back to Mason. "Mommy wants to talk to you." Mason took the phone, stepped into the hallway. "Clara." "Mr. Reed." Her voice was stronger today, less fractured. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You're taking care of my daughter. You kept her out of the system. You—" Her voice caught. "I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything." Mason leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted again. "How are you feeling?" "Better. They've got my levels stabilized. Doctor says I can probably go home tomorrow if everything stays steady." Tomorrow. Back to that apartment, back to 2 jobs and unpaid bills and rationing insulin. "Clara, about that, I know what you're going to say." Her voice turned defensive, brittle. "And I appreciate it, but we'll be fine. I've been managing this long. I can keep managing. By collapsing on your kitchen floor?" Silence. "I'm sorry," Mason said. "That was out of line." "No, you're right." She sounded tired, defeated. "I'm not managing. I'm drowning, but I don't know what else to do. Let me help." "Why?" The same question she'd asked in the hospital. "Why do you care?" Mason thought about Emma's frozen fingers, about the way she'd whispered please in the snow, about how she'd fallen asleep in his arms, trusting him completely. "Because someone should," he said again, "and because I can. I don't want charity." "It's not charity, it's—" What was it? He didn't even know. "It's helping. That's all. Just let me help." Claire was quiet for so long Mason thought she'd hung up. Then, "What did you have in mind?" "I have a building in Chelsea, residential. Good building, good neighborhood. There's a 2-bedroom unit that's been vacant for a month. Move in there. No rent." "Mr. Reed." "And stop working yourself to death. I need a property manager for that building anyway. Decent salary, health insurance, normal hours. You could—" "Stop." Claire's voice was sharp. "Just stop. I can't. I appreciate everything you've done. I really do. But I can't let you just fix my entire life. That's not how this works." "Why not?" "Because then what? You get bored of playing savior and we're back where we started? Except now Emma's attached to you and your son in this life we can't actually have?" Her words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because she was right. Maybe because he didn't have a good answer. "I'm not trying to play savior," he said quietly. "Then what are you trying to do?" The same question Richard had asked. The same question he'd been asking himself all morning. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know you almost died 2 days ago. I know your daughter is 4 years old, and she had to save your life because you don't have anyone else. I know that's not okay." "Lots of things aren't okay, Mr. Reed. That doesn't mean some billionaire swoops in and fixes them." "Maybe it should." Clara laughed, but it was hollow. "You don't get it. People like you never do. This isn't a business deal you can negotiate. This is my life. Emma's life. And we've been on our own for 4 years. We're used to it. That doesn't mean you have to stay that way, doesn't it?" She sighed. "Look, I have to go. They're bringing meds. Thank you for taking care of Emma. Really, I'll pick her up as soon as I'm released." Clara. But she'd already hung up. Mason stood in the hallway, the phone dead in his hand, and felt something like frustration mixed with something else. Something unfamiliar. At 2:00 exactly, the doorbell rang. Mason opened it to find Jennifer Martin from Child Services, accompanied by a younger woman with a laptop. "Mr. Reed?" Jennifer's smile was professional, practiced. "This is my colleague, Amy Chen. We're here for the home evaluation." "Come in." They walked through the apartment, Amy taking notes on her laptop, Jennifer asking questions. How many bedrooms? Was the building secure? Where would Emma sleep? Mason answered mechanically, aware of how this looked. A single father with his own son, taking in an unrelated child. It didn't make sense. He could see them trying to figure out his angle. Emma and Ethan had been playing quietly in Ethan's room, but they emerged when they heard voices. Emma saw Jennifer and froze. "Hi, Emma," Jennifer said gently. "Remember me from the hospital?" Emma nodded, moving closer to Mason, her small hand finding his. "I'm just here to check on you, make sure you're doing okay. Are you having fun with Mr. Reed and Ethan?" Another nod. "Can you tell me what you did today?" "We built Legos." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "And I had pancakes." "That sounds nice. And you feel safe here?" Emma looked up at Mason, then back at Jennifer. "Yeah." Jennifer made a note, turned to Mason. "Can we speak privately?" They moved to the study while Mrs. Chen distracted the kids with cookies. Jennifer sat across from Mason's desk, her expression unreadable. "You understand this is highly unusual," she said. "I do. In my 15 years with CPS, I've never had a complete stranger volunteer to foster a child. I'm not looking to foster her permanently, just until her mother is back on her feet." "And how long is that?" "As long as it takes." Jennifer leaned back, studying him. "Ms. Diaz is being released tomorrow. Barring any complications, Emma can go home then." "Home to what?" Mason couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. "That apartment is barely habitable. Clara's working 2 jobs and still can't afford insulin. You saw the same things I did that night." "I did. Which is why we'll be conducting our own home evaluation and setting up regular check-ins with Ms. Diaz." Jennifer paused. "But that's separate from this situation. What I need to understand is your motivation here, Mr. Reed, because Emma's welfare is my priority, and I need to know you're not using her to what? I don't know. Assuage guilt? Play hero? Get good press for your company?" Mason felt anger flash hot in his chest. "You think I'm doing this for PR? I think rich people do strange things sometimes, and a 4-year-old girl shouldn't be caught in the middle of whatever this is." "This," Mason said, his voice hard, "is making sure a kid doesn't go hungry, making sure she's warm and safe while her mother recovers. That's it." "Is it?" Jennifer's eyes were sharp. "Because Ms. Diaz indicated you offered her a job, an apartment. I offered to help. Why? Why does it matter?" "Because Emma needs stability, not a temporary fantasy. If you're going to be in her life, I need to know you're committed. And if you're not, I need to know that too." The question hung in the air between them, heavy and complicated. Was he committed? To what? A kid he'd known for less than 24 hours? A woman who'd made it clear she didn't want his help? But then he thought about Emma asleep in the guest room, asking him to stay. Thought about her eating that second sandwich like she couldn't believe there was more. Thought about how she'd called him this morning when she had a nightmare and he'd gone to her without thinking. "I'm committed to making sure they're okay," he said finally. "Beyond that, I don't know, but I'm not walking away." "But," Jennifer studied him for another long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, Emma can stay here until her mother is released. But Mr. Reed, if this goes sideways, if you hurt that little girl by making promises you can't keep, I will personally make sure you regret it." "Understood." After they left, Mason found Emma and Ethan back in the Lego room, building what appeared to be a castle. "Is the lady gone?" Emma asked. "Yeah." "Is she mad at me?" Mason crouched down to her level. "No, sweetheart, she's not mad at you. She just wants to make sure you're okay." "I am okay." Emma looked at the castle, then back at Mason. "Can I stay here one more night? Mommy said she's coming to get me tomorrow." "Of course you can stay." Emma smiled, then went back to her building. Ethan showed her how to attach a turret, his voice patient and gentle. And Mason watched them, these 2 kids who'd known each other for less than a day, already acting like friends. That night after dinner, Mrs. Chen made spaghetti and Emma ate 2 full plates. Mason tucked both kids into bed, Ethan first, in his perfectly organized room. "She's nice," Ethan said as Mason pulled the covers up. "Yeah, she is. Are you going to help her and her mom? Like, really help them?" "I'm trying." Ethan nodded, processing this. "I think that's good. We have a lot. We should share." Mason felt that crack widen again. "When did you get so wise?" "I don't know. Mom says I get it from her." Mason smiled despite himself. "Your mom's probably right." Then he went to Emma's room. She was already in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Will you stay again?" she asked. Until I fall asleep? Yeah. He sat in the armchair, and Emma's eyes tracked him in the dim light. Mason? Yeah? Tomorrow I have to go home. I know. I don't want to. Her voice was small, breaking. I like it here. I like Ethan. I like the pancakes and the Legos and the big windows. Mason didn't know what to say. He couldn't make her promises he couldn't keep. Couldn't tell her everything would be okay when he didn't know if it would be. Your mom loves you very much, he said finally, and she's so proud of how brave you've been. But what if she falls down again? What if she won't wake up and I can't find you? And there it was, the fear Emma had been carrying, hidden under laughter and Lego towers and pancakes. Mason moved to the bed, sat down on the edge. Your mom is going to be okay. The doctors are making sure of that, and if you ever need help, ever, you can call me. Okay? No matter what. Promise? He thought about Jennifer's warning, about Clara's defensiveness, about all the ways this could go wrong. Promise, he said anyway. Emma reached out and took his hand, held it tight, and Mason sat there in the dark, holding the hand of a little girl who'd somehow become his responsibility in less than 2 days, and realized his life would never be the same. The morning came too fast. Mason woke to find Emma already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter in the clothes Mrs. Chen had bought her yesterday, a purple sweater and jeans that actually fit, pushing cereal around in a bowl she hadn't touched. Not hungry? He asked. She shook her head, her eyes fixed on the milk turning pale brown from the chocolate cereal. You nervous about seeing your mom? No, I want to see her. Emma's voice was flat. I just don't want to leave. Mason poured himself coffee, aware of Mrs. Chen watching from the stove where she was making eggs for Ethan. The housekeeper had barely said anything since she'd arrived an hour ago, but her eyes kept tracking between Mason and Emma like she was trying to solve an equation. You know you can visit, right? Mason said. You and your mom. Any time. Emma finally looked at him. Really? Really? Ethan would probably stage a revolt if you didn't come back to finish that castle. That got a small smile. It's a really good castle. It's an excellent castle. Ethan appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair sticking straight up. Are you talking about the castle? Yep. I added a moat last night. Want to see, Emma? Emma slid off the stool and followed Ethan without another word, leaving her uneaten cereal behind. Mason watched them go, then felt Mrs. Chen's presence beside him. You're in over your head, she said quietly. I know. That child is attached to you now. To this place. To Ethan. I know that too. And when they leave today and go back to their life, what then? Mason didn't have an answer. He'd been avoiding that question since Jennifer left yesterday. You could actually help them, Mrs. Chen continued. You have the resources, but you need to commit or walk away. Middle ground just hurts everyone. Since when did you become a therapist? Since I started working for a man who thinks money solves everything but can't figure out why his own son barely talks to him. The words landed like a slap. Mason turned to look at her, but Mrs. Chen's expression was neutral, already moving back to the stove. That was uncalled for, he said. Was it? When's the last time you asked Ethan about school? About his friends? About anything that matters? I ask him things. Between phone calls, maybe. Between meetings. She cracked an egg into the pan with more force than necessary. That little girl in there? She's already looking at you like you hung the moon. And your own son is watching, wondering why a stranger gets more of your attention than he does. That's not, isn't it? Mrs. Chen turned to face him fully now. I've watched you this weekend, Mr. Reed. I've seen you more present, more engaged, more human than I've seen you in 5 years. And it's all because of a crisis. Because some child needed you, and you couldn't throw money at it and move on. Mason felt heat rising in his face. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? I've raised 4 kids of my own. I know what it looks like when a parent shows up, and I know what it looks like when they don't. She pointed toward Ethan's room. You want to help Emma? Fine, help her. But don't forget about the child you already have while you're doing it. She turned back to the eggs, and Mason stood there feeling like he'd been gutted. Because she was right. About all of it. At 10 o'clock, his phone rang. The hospital. Mr. Reed, this is Dr. Patel. I'm calling about Clara Diaz. Mason's stomach dropped. Is she okay? She's fine. Actually, she's ready to be discharged. Her levels have been stable for 24 hours, and she's anxious to see her daughter. I understand Emma is staying with you? Yes. Ms. Diaz asked if you could bring Emma by around noon. We'll do the discharge paperwork, and they can go home together. Home. That word again. We'll be there, Mason said. After he hung up, he found Emma and Ethan in the Lego room. The castle had grown significantly overnight, towers and walls, and a drawbridge that actually moved. Emma, that was the hospital. Your mom's ready to go home. We're going to pick her up in a couple hours. Emma's face lit up. She's okay? She's okay. Can we bring her here to see the castle? Mason glanced at Ethan, who was nodding enthusiastically. Maybe. We'll see how she feels. The 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Chen packed up the clothes she'd bought for Emma, adding extras that Clara would probably try to refuse. Ethan insisted on giving Emma 3 of his favorite Lego sets to take home. Emma hugged each box like it was precious treasure. You have to come back and tell me what you build, Ethan said seriously. I will, I promise. In the car on the way to the hospital, Emma was quiet, pressed against the window, watching the city slide past. Mason's driver, Marcus, who'd worked for him for 6 years and had asked exactly 0 questions about the child who'd appeared in Mason's life, navigated through midday traffic while Mason tried to figure out what he was going to say to Clara. The night in the snow felt like weeks ago, like something that had happened to a different version of himself. They found Clara in a shared room on the 4th floor, already dressed in the same scrubs she'd been wearing when she collapsed, her discharge papers signed and stacked on the bedside table. She was thinner than Mason remembered, her face still pale, but her eyes were clear and focused. Those eyes found Emma first. Baby. Clara's voice broke, and then Emma was running, and Clara was pulling her daughter into her arms, and Mason felt like he was intruding on something sacred. I missed you so much, Clara whispered into Emma's hair. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Mommy. Mason took care of me, and I made a friend. His name is Ethan, and he has 1,000,000 Legos. Clara's eyes found Mason over Emma's head. Thank you, she mouthed. Mason nodded, staying near the door, giving them space. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair, hospital policy, even though Clara insisted she could walk, and they made their way down to the lobby. Emma chattered the entire time, telling her mother about the pancakes and the castle and the view from the 23rd floor, and how Ethan let her use all his best pieces. Clara listened, smiling, but Mason could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands kept checking her pockets, probably looking for the phone she didn't have, the keys to an apartment that was waiting for her like a cage. In the lobby, Marcus pulled the car around. Clara stopped when she saw it. A black Mercedes, sleek and expensive and absolutely ridiculous for this situation. You don't have to, she started. I'm driving you home, Mason said, not up for debate. Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Just let Marcus help her into the back seat, Emma climbing in beside her, still talking. The drive to Clara's neighborhood was silent except for Emma's voice. Mason watched Clara's face in the rearview mirror, saw the way her expression closed off as they got closer, the buildings getting shorter and grimier, the streets getting narrower. When they pulled up in front of her building, Clara stared at it like it was a prison sentence. Home sweet home, she said, and there was nothing sweet in her voice. Marcus opened the door and Clara climbed out slowly, Emma bouncing ahead toward the entrance. Wait, Mason said, stepping out of the car. Just wait a second. Clara turned, and the look on her face was defensive before he even spoke. I know what you're going to say, she said, and the answer is still no. You haven't even heard you're going to offer to help again. You're going to tell me about the apartment in Chelsea and the job and the health insurance? You're going to make it sound reasonable and generous and like I'd be stupid to refuse. Would you? Be stupid? Clara laughed, but it was sharp. Probably. But I can't, Mr. Reed. I can't let you just fix my life because you feel guilty or charitable or whatever this is. It's not guilt. Then what is it? Emma had stopped at the building entrance, watching them with worried eyes. Mason lowered his voice. It's giving a damn, he said. It's seeing someone who's drowning and throwing them a rope. Why is that so hard to accept? Because ropes have strings attached. Because nothing is free. Because men like you don't just help people like me without wanting something. The accusation stung more than it should have. You think I want something from you? I don't know what you want. That's the problem. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You show up out of nowhere, you save my daughter, you take care of her like she's yours, and now you're offering me a new life? People don't do that, not without a reason. Maybe I'm just trying to be a decent human being. Decent human beings call 911. They don't take 4-year-olds home to their penthouses. They don't offer jobs and apartments to complete strangers. She wiped at her eyes angrily. I've been on my own for 4 years, Mr. Reed. I've learned not to trust things that sound too good to be true. Mason felt frustration building in his chest. So you'd rather go back to working yourself to death? Rather risk collapsing again, maybe when Emma's not there to save you? That's not fair. None of this is fair. You want to talk about fair? Fair would be you having access to affordable health care. Fair would be working 1 job instead of 3. Fair would be not having to choose between insulin and rent. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I'm not offering you charity, Clara. I'm offering you a chance to stop drowning. And yeah, maybe that makes me uncomfortable too. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing either. But I know what happens if you go back into that building and nothing changes. Ichei. You don't know anything about my life. Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you're not terrified right now. Tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve working yourself into another diabetic coma. Clara's face crumpled, just for a second, before she got it under control. I hate you a little bit right now. I can live with that. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. To accept your help means admitting I failed, that I can't take care of my own daughter. It means admitting you're human, that you need help. Everyone needs help sometimes. Not everyone, not people like you. Mason thought about his empty penthouse before Emma arrived, about Ethan's careful distance, about Mrs. Chen's words this morning. You'd be surprised, he said quietly. Emma called from the doorway. Mommy, are we going inside? Clara looked at her daughter, then back at Mason. Something shifted in her expression, resignation maybe, or exhaustion, or the slow collapse of walls she'd spent years building. 1 month, she said finally. What? 1 month. I'll try it for 1 month. The apartment, the job, but I pay rent. Whatever I can afford, even if it's $50. I'm not a charity case. Clara, and if it doesn't work, if this goes sideways, or if you change your mind, we walk away clean. No questions, no guilt. Deal? It wasn't what he'd offered. It had conditions and escape clauses and enough skepticism to fill a courtroom. But it was a yes. Deal, Mason said. Clara nodded once, then called to Emma. Come on, baby. Let's pack our stuff. They disappeared into the building, and Mason stood on the sidewalk feeling like he'd just negotiated the most important deal of his life and had no idea if he'd won or lost. Marcus appeared at his elbow. Should I wait, sir? Yeah, we're taking them to Chelsea. The apartment building in Chelsea was everything Clara's current place wasn't. Clean, safe, with a doorman who smiled and elevators that actually worked and hallways that smelled like fresh paint instead of desperation. Clara walked through the empty 2-bedroom unit like she was touring a museum, her hands clasped behind her back, not touching anything. Emma had no such reservations. She ran from room to room, squealing about the big windows and the bathtub and the closet that was bigger than their current bedroom. The master has an ensuite bathroom, Mason said, following Clara through the space. The second bedroom gets good light. Building has a gym, a roof deck, laundry on every floor. It's too much. It's been sitting vacant for 6 weeks. You'd actually be doing me a favor. Clara turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. Do you actually expect me to believe that? No, but I expect you to accept it anyway. She shook her head, but he caught the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. You're relentless. So I've been told. Emma ran back into the room, grabbed her mother's hand. Can I have the room with the window seat? Please, please, please? Clara looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, and Mason watched something break in her. The last wall. The final defense. Yeah, baby, she said quietly. You can have the window seat. Emma whooped and ran off to explore more, and Clara pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. Hey. Mason moved closer, uncertain. You okay? No. Her voice was muffled. I'm not okay. I'm terrified and confused, and I don't know if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life or the smartest decision. Probably both. That got a wet laugh. Clara lowered her hands, and her eyes were red but clear. I need to know something, and I need you to be honest. Okay? Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's just about helping. There's more to it, I can tell. Mason thought about how to answer that. About Emma's frozen fingers in the snow. About the way his penthouse had felt less empty with her laugh filling it. About Mrs. Chen's accusations and Ethan's careful hope and his ex-wife's voice in his head saying he'd always loved buildings more than people. I'm doing it because I can, he said finally. And because not doing it feels worse than doing it. And because... He paused, searching for words that didn't sound insane. Because Emma grabbed my hand that night and everything felt different. Like I'd been living my life on autopilot and suddenly someone hit the manual override. Clara studied his face for a long moment. That's either the most honest thing I've heard in years or the best line you've ever delivered. It's honest. Okay. She nodded, decision made. Then let's do this. But I meant what I said, 1 month. If it's weird or complicated, or if you decide this was a mistake, I need you to tell me. Don't string us along out of politeness. Same goes for you. Deal. They shook hands, formal and slightly ridiculous standing in the empty apartment, and Mason felt something settle in his chest. Not resolution exactly, more like the beginning of something he couldn't quite name. The next week was controlled chaos. Mason had furniture delivered, basics only, over Clara's protests. Mrs. Chen helped Clara and Emma move their meager belongings from the old apartment, which took exactly 1 carload and made Mason's chest tight every time he thought about it. Clara started the property management job, shadowing the outgoing manager, learning the systems, meeting tenants. She was good at it, organized, personable, detail-oriented. Mason watched her handle a complaint about a broken dishwasher with the kind of grace that came from years of dealing with difficult customers, and realized she'd been wasting her talent waiting tables. Emma started at a new preschool 3 blocks from the apartment, a place with an actual playground and teachers who didn't look exhausted. On her first day, Clara called Mason in tears. She has friends already, Clara said, her voice thick. She came home talking about some kid named Sophie, and they played in the sandbox, and she's never had that before. She's never had normal. She has it now. Because of you. Because of you. Mason corrected. You're the one who kept her safe and loved all these years. I just opened a door. Clara was quiet for a moment. Thank you for opening the door. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to examine. Mason fell into a routine he didn't recognize. Mornings, he'd stop by Clara's building on the way to the office, ostensibly to check on property issues, but really to see if they needed anything. Clara would roll her eyes at his transparent excuses, but let him in anyway, and Emma would show him whatever she'd built with her Legos the night before. Evenings, when he actually made it home at a reasonable hour, Ethan would ask if Emma could come over for a play date. The kids had become inseparable, building increasingly elaborate Lego structures and putting on shows and generally acting like the childhood friends Mason wished Ethan had more of. You're different, Ethan said one night after Emma had gone home. They were cleaning up Lego pieces from the living room, another mess Mason would have hated a month ago but now barely noticed. Different how? I don't know. Hear more, I guess, like you actually want to be here instead of at work. The observation was casual, matter of fact, and it cut deeper than any of Mrs. Chen's lectures. Do you like me being here more? Mason asked. Ethan shrugged, not looking up from the pile of bricks he was sorting. Yeah, it's nice, and Emma's cool. Her mom's nice too. Yeah, she is. Do you like her? Mason paused mid-reach for a stray Lego. Who? Clara? Yeah, you're always checking on them and bringing them stuff, and last week you missed that meeting in London because Emma had her preschool thing. Had he? Mason tried to remember. Right. The London investors. He'd rescheduled, sent Catherine instead. It had seemed like the obvious choice at the time. I'm just helping them get settled, he said. Okay. Ethan didn't sound convinced. But you smile different when you talk about them, like you used to smile at Mom before she left. Mason felt his heart stop. Ethan, it's okay. His son finally looked up, and his eyes were older than 7 had any right to be. I kind of hope you do like her, She makes you less weird. I'm not weird. Dad, you color code your socks. Despite everything, Mason laughed. That's called being organized. That's weird. Ethan grinned, then grew serious again. Do you think they'll stay? Emma and her mom? I don't know, buddy. I hope they do. It's better when they're around. After Ethan went to bed, Mason stood at his window looking down at the city, his phone in his hand. He'd pulled up Clara's number 3 times and put it away 3 times, not sure what he wanted to say. The truth was, Ethan was right. He did smile different when he thought about them. He looked forward to those morning check-ins in a way he'd never looked forward to board meetings or investor calls. He caught himself wondering what Clara thought about things, about the news, about the weather, about the small details of life he'd stopped noticing years ago. It wasn't just about helping anymore. When that realization hit, Mason felt something like panic. This wasn't the plan. The plan was to give them a stable situation until Clara could stand on her own. The plan didn't include catching feelings like he was 16 instead of 32. His phone rang, startling him. Clara. Hey, he answered. Everything okay? Define okay. She sounded tired, maybe a little drunk. Sorry, is this a bad time? No, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's actually really right, and that's kind of freaking me out. He heard her take a breath. Emma's asleep. I'm sitting in my apartment. My apartment with heat that works and windows that close and a kitchen where the outlets don't spark. And I'm drinking wine that I bought because I actually had money left after paying bills. And I'm trying to figure out if this is real or if I'm going to wake up back in that place with the broken window. Mason sat down on the couch, phone pressed to his ear. It's real. Is it? Because a month ago I was rationing insulin and working double shifts. And now I have health insurance, and my daughter has friends. And I came home to find you'd left groceries in my kitchen, even though I told you to stop doing that. You needed groceries. That's not the point. She paused. The point is, I don't know how to do this, how to accept help, how to trust that it's not going to disappear. It's not going to disappear. You don't know that. You can't promise that. No, Mason admitted. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere right now. And tomorrow's right now, and the day after that. Clara laughed, soft and sad. That's a terrible promise. It's the only one I can make. Silence stretched between them, filled with things neither of them was ready to say. Emma wants to have a birthday party, Clara said finally, in 2 weeks. She's never had a real party before, just me and her and a cupcake from the bodega. So throw her a party. I don't know how. I don't know what normal kids' parties look like. Neither do I. Ethan's parties are usually catered affairs with hired entertainment that cost more than most people's mortgages. That sounds horrible. It is horrible. Want to throw a horrible party together? Clara laughed again, and this time it was real. You're offering to help plan a 4-year-old's birthday party? I'm offering to show up with pizza and cake and let the kids destroy my apartment. How's that sound? Like the worst business decision you've ever made. Good thing it's not a business decision then. The words hung between them, meaning more than they should. Mason heard Clara's breath catch, heard the moment she understood what he wasn't saying. Mason, she started. I should let you go, he interrupted, suddenly terrified of where this conversation was heading. It's late, but text me party details and I'll make it happen. Okay? Her voice was quiet. And Mason, thank you for the groceries and the apartment and all of it. You're welcome. After she hung up, Mason sat in the dark and admitted to himself what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for Clara Diaz. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was, in a tired, real way that made the polished women at charity galas look fake. Not just because she was a good mother, though watching her with Emma did something to his chest that he couldn't quite name. He was falling for her because she was strong enough to accept help and brave enough to be terrified. Because she called him on his bullshit and didn't care about his money. Because when she smiled, really smiled, not the careful guarded things she wore like armor, it felt like winning. And that was a problem. Because Clara had made it clear this was temporary. A 1-month trial that had already stretched into 3 weeks. Because she'd been hurt before. He could see it in the way she flinched at kindness, in the way she kept expecting the other shoe to drop. Because he had a track record of choosing work over people, and he couldn't afford to prove her right. His phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Singapore investors want to reschedule. Next week good? Mason looked at his calendar. Next week, Emma's birthday was on Wednesday. The Singapore meeting would require him to be in the office by 6 a.m., meetings until 8 p.m. He typed back, "How about the week after?" Catherine's response was immediate. "They're getting impatient. We might lose the deal." Mason stared at the message. 6 months ago, he would have said yes without thinking. The deal was worth $40 million. The deal was always worth it. Week after, he typed again. Non-negotiable. Then he turned off his phone and went to check on Ethan, who was asleep with a Lego instruction manual on his chest and a smile on his face. And Mason realized that somewhere in the last 3 weeks, he'd stopped measuring success in deals closed and started measuring it in moments that mattered. He just hoped he wasn't too late to figure out how to keep both. Emma's birthday fell on a Wednesday, which meant Mason spent Tuesday night with Mrs. Chen transforming his living room into what could only be described as a 5-year-old's fever dream. Pink streamers, balloons in every color, a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Emma," in glittery letters that would probably be finding their way into his carpet for the next decade. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, standing on a chair to hang another streamer. "You're the one who said she could have whatever she wanted," Mrs. Chen replied, inflating another balloon. "I didn't think whatever she wanted would include turning my apartment into a carnival." "Then you don't know much about little girls." Ethan was sprawling on the couch, supposedly helping but mostly playing on his tablet. "I think it looks cool. Way better than my parties. Your parties have ice sculptures." "Exactly. Boring." Ethan looked up. "Is Emma's mom coming?" Mason felt his stomach do something complicated. "Yeah, she's coming after work." "Are you going to tell her?" "Tell her what?" Ethan gave him a look that was far too knowing for 7 years old. "That you like her. You're not exactly subtle, Dad." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Ethan went back to his tablet, but Mason caught the smirk on his face. Mrs. Chen, to her credit, said nothing, just handed him another balloon and raised an eyebrow that spoke volumes. By the time Clara arrived the next evening with Emma, the apartment had been invaded by 8 screaming children, pizza boxes covered every surface, and Mason was beginning to understand why people hired professionals for this kind of thing. Emma burst through the door in a purple dress Clara had clearly spent too much money on, her eyes going wide at the decorations. "This is for me?" she breathed. "All for you, birthday girl," Mason said. Emma squealed and launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "This is the best birthday ever." Over her head, Mason met Clara's eyes. She was wearing jeans and a green sweater that brought out the gold in her brown eyes, her hair down for once instead of pulled back. She looked tired. She always looked a little tired, but she was smiling. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "I know. It's too much." "Probably. She's going to remember this forever." "That's kind of the point." Clara shook her head, but she was still smiling. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." The party was beautiful chaos. Kids running everywhere, games that devolved into arguments, cake that ended up in hair and on walls and somehow on the ceiling. Emma was in the center of it all, laughing so hard she got the hiccups, playing with friends from her new school like she'd known them her whole life instead of 3 weeks. Mason found himself standing in the kitchen doorway next to Clara, both of them watching the mayhem. "She's happy," Clara said quietly. "Yeah, I never thought I'd be able to give her this. Normal kid stuff, parties and friends, and not worrying about whether we'd have enough food." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright. "You did that. You did that. I just opened the door, remember?" "You keep saying that, but we both know you did more than open a door." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You changed our lives, Mason." Before he could respond, Ethan appeared, dragging Emma behind him. "Mom says we can do presents now." The present opening was predictably chaotic. Emma got dolls and books and art supplies from her school friends. From Ethan, she got an enormous Lego set that Mason knew his son had been saving his allowance for. Emma hugged the box like it was made of gold. Then Clara pulled out a small wrapped package. "This is from me, baby." Emma tore into it and pulled out a necklace. Simple, with a silver heart pendant. Clara took it from her, fastened it around Emma's neck with shaking hands. "It was my mother's," Clara said softly. "Your grandmother's. She would have loved you so much." Emma touched the necklace, her small fingers tracing the heart. I love it, Mommy. They hugged, and Mason had to look away from the intimacy of it. Finally, he pulled out his gift, a large box that Emma attacked with enthusiasm. Inside was a dollhouse, not some cheap plastic thing, but a real wooden Victorian house with actual furniture and working lights. Emma's mouth fell open. Is that for me? All yours. It's like a real house. It is a real house, just very small. Emma threw her arms around him, and Mason felt his heart do that thing it had been doing a lot lately, crack open a little wider. After the guests left, and the apartment looked like a tornado had hit it, Clara insisted on helping clean up despite Mason's protests. They worked in comfortable silence, throwing away paper plates and popping balloons while the kids played with the dollhouse in the corner. I can't believe she's 5, Clara said, folding a streamer. Feels like yesterday I was bringing her home from the hospital, terrified I had no idea what I was doing. You figured it out. Barely. There were so many nights I just sat there crying, wondering how I was going to do this alone. She paused, looking at Emma. Her father left before she was born, said he wasn't ready to be a dad. I was 25, working at a diner, barely making rent. Having a baby seemed insane. But you did it anyway. I didn't have a choice. The second I saw her, it was over. I would have done anything for her. Claire's voice caught. I did do anything. Every job I hated, every double shift that made me want to scream, every time I skipped meals so she could eat. It was all for her. And it still wasn't enough. Mason stopped cleaning, turned to face her fully. Clara, I'm not looking for pity. I'm just trying to say thank you, really thank you, for seeing us, for caring when you didn't have to, for giving Emma a birthday she'll never forget. She wiped at her eyes. For giving her a childhood. You gave her a childhood. You gave her love and safety, and a mother who would walk through fire for her. That matters more than any party. Does it? Because right now she's playing with a $300 dollhouse instead of the cardboard box fort we would have made at home. The dollhouse doesn't love her. You do. That's what she'll remember. Clara looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something that made Mason's pulse kick up. When did you get so wise about parenting? She asked softly. I'm not. Ask Ethan. I'm pretty sure he thinks I'm emotionally stunted. He doesn't think that. He adores you. I see the way he looks at you now, like you hung the moon. That's new? Is it? Or are you just noticing it now? The question hit too close to home. Mason thought about Mrs. Chen's accusations about all the years he'd spent working instead of being present. Maybe both, he admitted. They went back to cleaning, but the air between them felt different, charged, like they were both dancing around something neither wanted to name. When the apartment was finally restored to something resembling order, Clara gathered Emma's things, new toys, leftover cake, the dollhouse that barely fit through the door. Say thank you to Mason and Ethan, Clara prompted. Thank you. Emma hugged them both, still wearing her birthday crown. This was the best day ever. Any time, Princess, Mason said. At the door, Clara paused. Walk us down? Sure. They took the elevator in silence, Emma chattering between them about her favorite parts of the party. In the lobby, Marcus was already waiting with the car to drive them the 10 blocks home. This is really unnecessary, Clara said. We can take the subway. It's 9 o'clock and Emma's carrying half a toy store. Take the car. Clara rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Emma climbed in, already half asleep, the dollhouse taking up most of the back seat. Clara turned to Mason, and in the warm light of the lobby, he could see every detail of her face. The faint freckles across her nose, the scar near her eyebrow, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking too hard. Mason, she started, then stopped. I need to tell you something. His heart stuttered. Okay. The month is up. Actually, it was up last week. Right. The trial period. The escape clause she'd insisted on. And? He tried to keep his voice neutral. And I don't want to leave. The words came out in a rush. The apartment, the job, this life, I don't want to go back. Emma doesn't want to go back. We're happy here, really happy, and that terrifies me because I keep waiting for it to fall apart. It's not going to fall apart. You can't know that. No, But I can choose to show up every day and make sure it doesn't. We both can. Clara looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. There's something else. Mason's chest tightened. What? I think I'm starting to feel things I shouldn't feel. About you. About this situation. And I don't know if that's real, or if it's just gratitude, or if I'm mixing up appreciation with something else because you've been so good to us. Mason's brain short-circuited. He'd expected her to say she wanted to renegotiate the rent, or change her hours, or literally anything except that. Clara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything. I just needed to tell you. Because honesty, right? That was the deal. And I'm trying to be honest about the fact that this is getting complicated for me, and I don't want it to mess everything up, but I also can't keep pretending I don't feel it. She turned to get in the car, but Mason caught her hand. Wait. She froze, looking at where their hands connected. It's complicated for me, too, he said quietly. Has been for weeks. I just didn't know if saying it would make you run. Clara's eyes met his, wide and vulnerable. And now that I've said it, now I'm going to ask if I can take you to dinner, a real dinner, just us. No kids, no birthday parties, no property management discussions. That sounds like a date. That's because it is a date. A slow smile spread across Claire's face. I haven't been on a date in 6 years. Then we're both out of practice. Should be a disaster. Probably. Friday night? I'll have to find a babysitter. Mrs. Chen loves Emma. I'll ask her. Clara laughed, and it was the sound of something unlocking. You've thought this through. I've thought about little else for 3 weeks. She squeezed his hand once, then let go and climbed into the car. Through the window, she smiled at him, and Mason felt like he'd won the lottery. The next 2 days were a study in anticipation and panic. Mason changed his outfit 4 times on Friday before settling on jeans and a button-down. Nice, but not trying too hard. He made reservations at a quiet Italian place in the West Village, small and intimate, the kind of restaurant that didn't care about celebrity clientele or business deals. When he picked Clara up at 7, she answered the door in a navy dress he'd never seen before, her hair in waves around her shoulders. You look beautiful, he said. She blushed. You clean up pretty well yourself. Inside, Emma was teaching Mrs. Chen a complicated dance routine while Ethan provided commentary. The scene was so domestic, it made Mason's chest ache. You be good for Mrs. Chen, Clara told Emma, kissing her forehead. I will. Have fun on your date, Mommy. Clara shot Mason a look. Did you tell her it was a date? Ethan might have mentioned something. Ethan has a big mouth. Ethan is a romantic, his son called from the couch. And it's about time. Mrs. Chen shooed them out the door with a knowing smile, and suddenly Mason was walking through the city with Clara Diaz, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The restaurant was perfect. Dim lighting, good wine, food that actually tasted like something instead of just costing something. They talked about everything and nothing. Clara's childhood in Arizona, Mason's early years building his company, the dreams they'd given up, and the ones they'd found instead. I wanted to be a teacher, Clara admitted over pasta. Elementary school. I was 2 semesters away from my degree when I got pregnant. Had to drop out, start working full-time. You could go back. Finish. Maybe. I don't know if I remember how to be a student. She twirled her fork in her pasta. What about you? Did you always want to build buildings? Wanted to be a musician, actually. Jazz pianist. Clara's eyes widened. Seriously? Dead serious. Studied at Juilliard for a year before my father had a heart attack, and I had to take over the family business. Never touched a piano again. That's sad. It's practical. The business needed someone, and I was the someone. But did you want to be? Mason thought about that. 22 years old, standing at his father's bedside, listening to lawyers explain the empire that was about to become his responsibility, the piano gathering dust in his apartment, the choice that wasn't really a choice. No, he said honestly. But I got good at it anyway. You could play again. It's not too late. I'm 32. I haven't played in a decade. So? Emma's 5 and she just learned what Legos are. We're all allowed to start late. The simple wisdom of that hit him harder than it should have. When had he started believing second chances were for other people? What would you do? Clara asked. If you could do anything tomorrow, money's no object, responsibilities don't exist. What would make you happy? Mason looked across the table at her, at this woman who'd come into his life through a snowstorm and turned everything sideways, and realized he already knew the answer. This, he said. Exactly this. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. Smooth. I'm serious. 6 months ago, my perfect day was closing a deal and going home to an empty apartment. Now it's pizza with 8 screaming kids and helping Emma build Lego houses and sitting here with you. Mason, I know we're supposed to take this slow. I know you're worried about gratitude versus real feelings. I know this is complicated. He reached across the table, took her hand. But I also know I haven't felt this alive in years. And I don't want to pretend I don't. Clara's fingers tightened around his. I'm scared. Of what? Of this being too good. Of waking up and having it gone. Of Emma getting attached and then losing another person who matters. Her voice dropped. Of me getting attached and losing you. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. I can promise that whatever this is, I want to figure it out with you. He paused. Unless you don't want that. I do want that. That's what scares me. They sat there, hands linked across the table, the restaurant humming with conversation around them, and Mason felt the weight of the moment. This was it, the turning point, the place where they either moved forward or retreated back to safe distance. So we're doing this? He asked. Clara took a shaky breath. We're doing this. Should we establish ground rules, boundaries? Probably. She thought for a moment. Emma comes first, always. If this gets weird or complicated, we protect her. Agreed. Ethan too. And we're honest. No games, no pretending things are fine when they're not. Done. Anything else? Clara bit her lip. We take it slow. I haven't done this in a long time, and the last time I did, it ended with me pregnant and alone. I need to trust this. We'll go as slow as you need. Okay. She smiled, and it was like sunrise. Okay. The walk home was different than the walk there. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining. They talked less, content in comfortable silence, just being together. At Clara's building, Mason walked her to her door like this was a normal first date and not the beginning of something that could either heal them both or destroy everything they'd built. Thank you for tonight, Clara said, keys in hand. It was perfect. Even with my terrible out-of-practice date skills, especially with those. She hesitated, then stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Good night, Mason. Good night. He waited until she was inside, watched the light turn on in her apartment window, then walked the 10 blocks home with a smile he couldn't suppress. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Mason and Clara started having weekly dinners, sometimes with the kids, sometimes just the two of them. They didn't announce anything officially, didn't sit Emma and Ethan down for a talk, but the kids figured it out anyway with the particular intuition children have for these things. Are you and Emma's mom, boyfriend, and girlfriend now? Ethan asked one morning over breakfast. Mason nearly choked on his coffee. What? It's a simple question, Dad. Yes or no? It's complicated. That means yes. Ethan grinned. Cool. Does that mean Emma's going to be my sister? Slow down. We're just dating. But you like her a lot, right? Like more than you liked that lady from your office who kept bringing you coffee? Jennifer from accounting was just being friendly. She wanted to marry you. Everyone knew it. Ethan took a bite of cereal. But Clara's better. She laughs at your jokes even when they're not funny. My jokes are funny. Dad, no. Despite the chaos of navigating a new relationship while parenting and working, Mason found himself happier than he'd been in years. Clara challenged him in ways no one had since Sarah. She called him out when he got too focused on work, reminded him when he was being emotionally unavailable, and somehow managed to be both fierce and gentle at the same time. And Emma had wrapped herself around his heart so completely that he sometimes forgot she wasn't actually his daughter. She called him Mason, not Dad, but the way she reached for his hand in crowded places and saved her biggest smiles for him felt like family anyway. The trouble started on a Tuesday in April. Mason was in his office, deep in negotiations for a new development in Brooklyn, when his phone rang. Clara, her name flashing on the screen. Hey, I'm actually in a meeting. Emma's school called. Clara's voice was tight, controlled panic. She fell off the playground equipment. They think her arm might be broken. Mason was standing before he realized he'd moved. Which hospital? Mount Sinai West. I'm on my way, but I'm in Queens checking on a plumbing issue and traffic is insane. I'm 10 minutes away. I'll get there first. He hung up, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the conference room full of lawyers without a word of explanation. Catherine tried to stop him in the hallway. Mason, the Brooklyn deal. Handle it. I can't just handle a $30 million negotiation, then postpone it. I don't care. He was already at the elevator. Something came up. In the hospital emergency room, Mason found Emma in a curtained bay, her left arm cradled against her chest, tears streaming down her face. A nurse was trying to examine her, but Emma kept pulling away. "Emma," Mason said, and her head whipped around. "Mason!" She reached for him with her good arm, sobbing. "It hurts." He was at her side in 2 steps, letting her bury her face in his chest. "I know, Princess, I know. But the nurse needs to look at it, okay? I'll be right here. Don't leave. I'm not going anywhere." The nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, gave him a grateful look. "Are you Dad?" Mason opened his mouth to correct her, but Emma nodded against his chest and whispered, "Yes," and his throat closed up. "Okay, Dad. We're going to get x-rays, then the doctor will be in to talk about next steps." The x-rays confirmed a fracture. "Clean break," the doctor said. "Would heal fine with a cast." Emma got to pick the color. Purple. Obviously, and by the time Clara burst through the doors 45 minutes later, Emma was already making jokes about being a superhero with an arm made of stone. "Oh, baby," Clara breathed, rushing to the bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Mommy. Mason was here the whole time, and I got purple." Clara looked at Mason over Emma's head, and the gratitude in her eyes made his chest tight. "Thank you," she mouthed. Later, after Emma had been discharged and was set up on Clara's couch with ice cream and cartoons, Clara pulled Mason into the kitchen. "You left work for this." "Of course I did." "Mason, she's not—" Clara stopped, chose different words. "You didn't have to. I would have gotten here eventually." "She needed someone now. I was closer." "But the meeting, Catherine called me, freaking out. Something about Brooklyn and millions of dollars." Mason shrugged. "They'll reschedule." "You can't just walk out of meetings worth millions of dollars because a kid broke her arm." "I can if the kid is Emma." Clara stared at him, something complicated moving across her face. "She called you Dad." "I know." "And you didn't correct her?" "No." "Mason, we need to talk about this, about what this is, about boundaries." "I thought we established boundaries." "We established dating boundaries. We didn't establish you becoming a father figure to my daughter. Boundaries." The words landed like a punch. Mason took a step back, feeling suddenly uncertain. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know." Clara's voice rose, then dropped when she remembered Emma in the next room. "I don't know. This is moving so fast. 3 months ago, we were strangers. Now you're leaving million-dollar meetings to hold my daughter's hand in the ER. Would you rather I hadn't?" "No, of course not. I'm grateful you were there. But I'm also terrified because what happens when this ends? When you realize playing house isn't actually fun anymore? Emma's already calling you Dad in her head. What happens to her when you leave?" "I'm not leaving." "Everyone leaves, Mason. Everyone. Her father left before she was born. My parents died when I was 20. Every relationship I've tried to build has fallen apart. Why would this be different?" Mason saw it then, the real fear under all her defenses. Not that he'd get bored, that he'd prove her right, that happiness was temporary and trusting it was foolish. "Because I'm not everyone," he said quietly. "Because I know what it's like to lose people and choose work instead of showing up, and I'm done with that. Because when Emma called me Dad today, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like coming home." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I mean them." "You can't know that. 3 months, Mason. We've known each other for 3 months. I've known Emma for 3 months. I've known you for 3 months. And I felt more alive, more present, more like myself than I have in the entire decade before that. So yeah, it's fast. Yeah, it's complicated. But that doesn't make it less real." A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Emma stood there, purple cast on her arm, her face uncertain. "Are you fighting?" she asked in a small voice. "No, baby," Clara said quickly. "We're just talking." "It sounds like fighting. Are you mad at Mason because I called him Dad?" Clara's face crumpled. "Oh, Emma, no, I'm not mad." "Then why are you crying?" "Because sometimes grown-ups cry when they're scared, not just when they're sad." Emma processed this, then turned to Mason. "Are you leaving?" "No." "Promise?" Mason looked at Clara, saw the fear and hope warring in her expression, saw the moment she made the choice to trust or run. She gave him the smallest nod. "I promise," Mason said. Emma ran to him, wrapped her good arm around his waist, and Mason held her while Clara watched with tears streaming down her face. And in that moment, standing in a small kitchen in Chelsea with a 5-year-old clinging to him and a woman he was falling for crying against the counter, Mason understood what he'd been missing his whole life. Not empire building, not success, not control. Just this. Just family. Just showing up and staying even when it was hard. Just love in its messiest, most complicated, most beautiful form. The weeks after Emma's broken arm became a test Mason hadn't known he was signing up for. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because of the opposite. The everyday grind of showing up, staying present, choosing people over deals. He failed at it more than he succeeded. There was the Tuesday he missed Emma's first day back at school with the cast because a zoning meeting ran long. The Thursday, he promised Ethan they'd go to the Science Museum and ended up stuck on a call with investors in Tokyo until 8 p.m. The Saturday, Clara had asked him to come to dinner, and he'd said yes, then gotten pulled into an emergency with a contractor in Philadelphia and arrived 3 hours late to cold pasta and her tight smile that said she'd expected exactly this. "You're trying," she said that night after Emma had gone to bed disappointed. "I know you're trying. Doesn't feel like enough." It's not about enough. It's about showing up when you say you will. Emma doesn't understand when work gets in the way. She just knows you weren't there. The words stung because they were true. Mason had spent his whole life believing intentions mattered more than outcomes, that working hard was the same as being present. But Emma didn't care about his intentions. She cared that he'd promised to see her show off her cast signatures and hadn't been there. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Balance everything? Be good at work and good at this." Clara's expression softened. "Neither do I. I've been doing this alone for 5 years and I still screw it up constantly. But the difference is, I don't have a choice. You do. You can always go back to the way things were." "I don't want that." "Then prove it. Because right now you're trying to have it both ways, and Emma's the one who gets hurt when that doesn't work." The conversation haunted him for days. He thought about it during board meetings, during site visits, during the million small decisions that made up his days. Every time his phone rang with work, he heard Clara's voice asking if he was choosing them or choosing the easier path. The real reckoning came in May. His ex-wife Sarah called on a Wednesday afternoon. Mason was at his desk, reviewing contracts, when her name lit up his screen. They talked maybe twice a year, usually about Ethan's schedule or school events. This felt different. "Sarah, everything okay?" "That depends on your definition of okay." Her voice was crisp, professional. The voice she used when she was annoyed but trying to hide it. "I got an interesting call from Ethan yesterday." Mason's stomach dropped. "What kind of call?" "The kind where he tells me you have a girlfriend and her daughter is basically living with you and he's calling this 5-year-old his sister." It's not that simple, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're playing house with some woman and her kid, while our actual son watches from the sidelines. That's not what's happening. No? Then explain it to me, Mason. Explain how the man who was too busy to make it to Ethan's parent-teacher conferences suddenly has time to play dad to someone else's daughter. The accusation landed like a physical blow. "Sarah, I don't care who you date. You want to have a girlfriend, great. But don't you dare let Ethan get attached to this woman and her kid just to have it fall apart when you get bored. He's already been through one parent leaving. He doesn't need to go through it again with people who aren't even family. They are family, or they're becoming family. I don't know exactly what this is yet, but it matters." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Does Ethan matter?" "Of course he does." "Then why is he telling me he barely sees you anymore? That you're always at Clara's or helping with Emma or canceling plans with him for your new instant family?" Mason felt sick. I didn't realize. Of course you didn't. You never do. You get focused on something and everything else disappears. She sighed. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to protect our son. If this thing with Clara is real, if you're serious about it, then include Ethan. Make him part of it. But if it's just another thing you're going to lose interest in when it gets hard, end it now before he gets hurt. After she hung up, Mason sat at his desk staring at nothing. The contracts blurred on the screen. Outside his window, the city moved, indifferent to his crisis. He thought about the last few weeks. How many dinners had he had at Clara's without inviting Ethan? How many times had he helped Emma with homework while his own son did his alone? How many moments had he stolen with Clara while Ethan sat at home with Mrs. Chen, probably wondering why his dad had time for everyone except him? He'd been so focused on proving to Clara he could show up that he'd stopped showing up for the kid who'd needed him all along. That night, Mason ordered Chinese food and ate dinner with just Ethan. No phones, no work, no distractions. His son picked at his low mane, unusually quiet. Your mom called me today, Mason said. Ethan's head snapped up. I didn't mean to tell her, it just came out. It's okay. I'm glad you did. Mason set down his chopsticks. She said you feel like I've been spending all my time with Clara and Emma. Ethan shrugged, eyes on his plate. You have been. You're right, and I'm sorry. It's fine. It's not fine. You're my son. You should come first. But Emma needs you more. She doesn't have a dad. The simple logic of it broke Mason's heart. That doesn't mean you need me less. I'm not a baby. I can take care of myself. You're 7. You shouldn't have to take care of yourself. Ethan finally looked up, and his eyes were wet. Do you like them more than me? Emma and her mom? No, never. Mason moved around the table, crouched next to Ethan's chair. I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, right? Then why does it feel like you're trying to replace me? I'm not replacing you. I'm trying to figure out how to be good at loving more people. And I'm doing a terrible job of it. You're doing okay with Emma. Maybe. But I'm failing at being your dad, and that's not okay. Ethan was quiet, processing. Then, do you love Clara? The question caught Mason off guard. Did he? They'd been careful with that word, dancing around it, both too scared to say it first. Yeah, he said. I think I do. And Emma? Emma too. Then I want them to stay. But I want you too. Not just the leftover parts of you after you're done with work and them. The real you. Mason pulled his son into a hug, feeling Ethan's small arms wrap around his neck. You got it, buddy. Real me. Showing up, I promise. You promise a lot of things. I know, but I'm going to start keeping them. That weekend, Mason canceled everything. No meetings, no site visits, no phone calls. He took Ethan and Emma to Central Park. Just the 3 of them, and they rented bikes and got ice cream and fed ducks by the pond. Clara had a property emergency she couldn't get out of, so it was just Mason and the kids. Emma chattered the entire time, pointing out dogs and asking why the sky was blue, and making up stories about the people they passed. Ethan rode his bike beside Mason's, quieter, but Mason caught him smiling when Emma did something particularly silly. She's kind of annoying, Ethan said when Emma ran ahead to look at a street performer. Yeah, but also kind of cool. Yeah. If you and Clara got married, would that make Emma my real sister? Mason nearly crashed his bike. Whoa, nobody said anything about marriage. But if you did, then yeah, she'd be your real sister. Ethan thought about this. I think I'd like that. Having a sister. Yeah? Yeah, but can we have some stuff that's just us? Like bike rides or whatever, without her sometimes? Absolutely. Every Saturday. Just you and me. Deal? Deal. They shook on it, and Mason felt something settle in his chest. This could work. It was messy and complicated, and he was going to screw it up regularly, but it could work. The real test came 3 weeks later. Mason's biggest deal of the year was closing, a partnership with a London firm worth over $100 million. The signing was scheduled for a Thursday in Manhattan, with the British investors flying in specifically for it. Mason had been working on this for 18 months. It was the kind of deal that made careers. The problem was Thursday was also Ethan's school play. He was playing a tree in some production about the environment, and he'd been practicing his one line for weeks. Mason had actually promised, with Ethan making him swear on a stack of Legos, that he'd be there. Wednesday night, his lead attorney called. The Brits want to move the signing to Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock, non-negotiable. Mason's blood went cold. The play starts at 2. What play? Ethan's school play. I promised I'd be there. Silence on the other end. Then, Mason, this is a $100 million deal. You can miss a school play. I can't. I promised. Send Catherine. Send flowers. Hell, send a video message. But you need to be at this signing. If you're not there, the deal could fall apart. After he hung up, Mason sat in his study with his head in his hands. This was the choice, laid out cleanly. The deal or his son. Success or showing up. The life he'd built or the life he was trying to build. He thought about Ethan's face when he'd promised, about Sarah's warning, about Emma asking if he was leaving and the weight of that promise. Then he called Clara. I need advice, he said when she answered. Okay. He explained the situation, the deal, the play, the impossible choice. Clara listened without interrupting. What do you want to do? She asked when he finished. I want to do both. I want to close the deal and see Ethan be a tree and not have to choose. But you have to choose. Yeah. So what does showing up look like here? Mason closed his eyes. He already knew the answer, had known it the second his attorney said 2 o'clock. It looks like letting the deal go. Can you live with that? I don't know. $100 million, Clara. That's not just money. It's expansion into Europe. That's legacy stuff. And Ethan's school play is your son knowing you chose him. Which legacy matters more? The question hung in the air, heavy and clarifying. I'm going to the play, Mason said. Yeah? Yeah. And I'm terrified and I might regret it, and my board is going to think I've lost my mind, but I'm going to the play. Good. He could hear the smile in her voice. That's growth, Reed. This growth thing is expensive. The best things usually are. Thursday morning, Mason called his attorney and told him to proceed without him. Catherine would represent Reed Global at the signing. The lawyer sputtered about optics and relationships and how this was career suicide. Let me be very clear, Mason said. My son has one line in a school play about recycling. He's going to say it while dressed as a tree, and I'm going to be in that audience watching him because that's what showing up looks like. If the British investors can't understand that, then they're not the kind of partners I want anyway. He hung up before the lawyer could argue. At 1:45 p.m., Mason walked into the elementary school auditorium. It was packed with parents holding cameras and grandparents with hard candies and younger siblings squirming in their seats. He found a spot near the middle, between a mom in yoga pants and a dad scrolling through his phone. The lights dimmed, the curtain opened, and there was Ethan, in a brown costume with paper leaves taped to his arms, standing perfectly still on stage. The play was exactly as terrible as elementary school plays always are. Kids forgot their lines. Someone knocked over a cardboard recycling bin. A first grader cried when his hat fell off. And then it was Ethan's moment. He stepped forward and in a voice much louder than necessary, delivered his line. We trees give oxygen to all living things. Mason's throat closed up. He pulled out his phone and took 17 photos, all of them blurry, all of them perfect. After the play, Ethan ran off stage and straight into Mason's arms. You came! Of course I came, I promised. But what about your big meeting? Wasn't as important as seeing you be the best tree in the entire forest. Ethan hugged him tighter. I was a good tree, wasn't I? The absolute best. They went for ice cream after, just the two of them, and Ethan talked nonstop about the play and his friends, and how Sophie from his class had completely messed up her line, but nobody cared because it was funny. And Mason listened, really listened, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from Catherine, from the attorneys, from board members. He ignored all of them. They could wait. This couldn't. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Mason finally checked his messages. The deal had closed. Catherine had handled it perfectly. The British investors had actually been charmed by his absence, apparently impressed that he'd chosen family over business. Shows character, one of them had said, according to Catherine's text. We like doing business with people who have their priorities straight. Mason laughed out loud. He'd spent 18 months working on this deal, terrified to miss one meeting, convinced his presence was essential. And it had closed without him. Maybe he wasn't as indispensable as he thought. Clara called at 10. How was the play? Ethan was magnificent, very convincing as foliage. And the deal? Closed without me. Turns out the world keeps spinning even when I'm not personally making it spin. Imagine that. Her voice was warm, teasing. I'm proud of you. For what? Missing a business meeting? For choosing your son? For keeping your promise? For becoming the man I hoped you were? Mason felt his chest tighten. Clara, I love you. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back and they'd finally broken free. I've been trying not to say it because it's scary and fast and complicated, but watching you choose Ethan today, hearing how happy he was, I love you, Mason Reed. And I'm done pretending I don't. Mason sat down, suddenly unsteady. You love me. Is that okay? Is it okay? Clara, I've been in love with you since you yelled at me in the hospital for trying to help. I just didn't want to say it and scare you off. She laughed, and it sounded like crying. We're both idiots. Completely. So what now? Mason thought about it. About the apartment in Chelsea where Clara and Emma lived. About his penthouse where Ethan lived. About the weird in-between they'd been navigating for months. Now I think we stop pretending this is temporary, he said. I think we figure out what forever looks like. That's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. You in? Yeah, Clara said softly. I'm in. They spent the next month figuring out what forever actually meant in practical terms. Mason sold his penthouse, too many memories of who he used to be, and found a place in Brooklyn. Big enough for 4 people and whatever chaos came with them. A brownstone with a backyard and enough bedrooms that everyone could have their own space and still come together. Clara fought him on it at first, insisted it was too much, too fast. But Emma and Ethan had other ideas. The kids had become a united front, planning which rooms would be theirs, designing the backyard, plotting world domination via Lego construction. They're making this impossible to say no to, Clara complained one night as they watched Emma and Ethan draw elaborate floor plans. That's their strategy. Smart kids. Are you sure about this? All of it? Because once we do this, there's no going back to separate lives. Mason took her hand. I've never been more sure of anything. Even with all the mess, the hard parts, the inevitable fights about whose turn it is to take out the trash? Especially with all that. The mess is the point, Clara. The mess means we're actually living instead of just surviving. They moved in August, and it was exactly as chaotic as expected. Boxes everywhere, furniture in wrong rooms, 2 kids arguing about who got the bigger bedroom. But it also felt right in a way Mason's carefully curated penthouse never had. The first night in the new house, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor because the furniture wasn't assembled yet. Emma and Ethan ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off bare walls. Clara leaned against Mason's shoulder, exhausted and happy. This is insane, she said. Completely. I can't believe we're doing this. Neither can I. I love you. I love you too. Later, after the kids were asleep in their new rooms and Clara had gone to unpack the kitchen, Mason found himself standing in what would become his study. It was smaller than his old one, less impressive. But there was a window that looked out on the backyard, and he could already picture lazy summer mornings, kids playing while he worked. His phone rang, his mother calling from Florida where she'd retired last year. Mason, I heard about the new house. When can I visit? Anytime, Mom. And this Clara, you're serious about her? Very serious. Good. It's about time you found someone who makes you smile like that. Like what? Like you're actually happy. I haven't heard you sound like this since before your father died. Since before you became so focused on the business that you forgot to have a life. Mason thought about that. About the decade he'd spent building an empire, measuring success in deals and dollars. About how empty that success had felt. I think I'm finally figuring out what matters, he said. That only took you 32 years. Better late than never. After they hung up, Mason went to check on Ethan. His son was sprawled across his new bed, arms flung out, deeply asleep. Mason adjusted the blanket, turned off the light, and stood there for a moment, just watching him breathe. In the next room, he could hear Emma's soft snores. He peeked in, found her curled up with the stuffed animal he'd bought her last week, the purple cast on her arm, long since healed and removed, replaced with a fading tan line. His family. Not by blood, not traditionally, but family nonetheless. Downstairs, Clara was in the kitchen, organizing dishes. She'd pulled her hair back, and she was humming something under her breath. Mason leaned against the doorway and just watched her, this woman who'd changed everything. She noticed him, smiled. What? Just thinking. About? About that night in the snow. About Emma grabbing my hand, about how I almost didn't stop. Clara set down the dish she was holding. What made you stop? Honestly, I don't know. Instinct, maybe? Or luck? Or maybe some part of me knew I needed saving as much as she did. You weren't the one who needed saving, wasn't I? I was living this perfect empty life, succeeding at everything that didn't matter and failing at everything that did. Emma didn't just save her mom that night. She saved me too. Clara crossed the kitchen, wrapped her arms around him. We saved each other. Yeah, we did. They stood there in the kitchen of their new house, holding each other while the city hummed outside and their kids slept upstairs, and Mason understood finally what wealth actually meant. It wasn't the buildings he owned, or the deals he'd closed, or the zeros in his bank account. It was this. It was having people who needed you and choosing to show up. It was frozen fingers grabbing your hand in a snowstorm and trusting you to help. It was love in its messiest, most complicated form. It was choosing the hard, beautiful work of being present over the easy success of being absent. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, it snowed again. Not the violent storm that had brought them together, but gentle flakes that turned the Brooklyn streets soft and quiet. Mason woke to find both kids already in the backyard, building a snowman. Clara was making coffee in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, hair a mess. Morning, she said, handing him a cup. Morning. He kissed her, tasting coffee and toothpaste and home. Kids are up early. Emma wanted to build a snowman before it melted. Ethan's out there supervising. They watched through the window as Emma rolled snow into balls that were definitely too big for her to lift, and Ethan tried to help while also insisting his engineering approach was better. The kids bickered and laughed and worked together, creating something imperfect and wonderful. Think we should go help? Clara asked. Probably, but they stood there a moment longer, just watching. Mason thought about that other snowstorm, about the billionaire he'd been, who measured everything in profit and loss. That man felt like a stranger now. You ever regret it? Clara asked quietly. Giving up the penthouse, the simple bachelor life, the ability to work 70 hours a week without anyone caring? Not even once. Not even when Emma draws on your work papers, or Ethan floods the bathroom, or I burn dinner for the 3rd time this week? Especially not then. She leaned against him, and they watched their kids through the window, these two small people who taught them both what love actually required. I'm going to marry you someday, Mason said. It wasn't a proposal, just a statement of fact. Clara smiled. Is that right? Yeah, when you're ready. No rush. But someday I'm going to make you Clara Reed, and Emma's going to get a dad who's actually legally hers, and Ethan's going to get the sister he keeps asking for. Pretty confident for a guy who burns toast. I'm working on my toast skills. You really are terrible at toast. Good thing I'm good at other things. Clara turned to face him fully, her eyes serious now. You're good at showing up, even when it's hard. Even when work is calling and the kids are screaming and nothing goes according to plan. You show up, Mason. That's all I ever wanted. It's all anyone ever wants, someone who stays. Outside, Emma shrieked with laughter as the snowman's head fell off. Ethan was laughing too, trying to fix it, both kids covered in snow and completely happy. Come on, Clara said, grabbing his hand. Let's go show them how it's done. They went outside into the cold and the snow, and Mason let Emma boss him around about the proper snowman construction technique, while Ethan provided commentary, and Clara took pictures on her phone that would definitely end up framed somewhere. And standing there in his backyard with snow in his hair, and wet socks, and a 4-year-old ordering him to make the snowman's arms bigger, Mason realized something. This was it. This was the thing he'd been building toward his entire life without knowing it. Not skyscrapers or empires or magazine covers. Just this messy, imperfect, absolutely perfect Saturday morning with the people who'd become his entire world. Emma had saved her mother that night in the snow. But really, she'd saved all of them. She'd saved Clara from drowning in survival mode. She'd saved Ethan from having a father who was physically present but emotionally gone. And she'd saved Mason from a life where success meant nothing because he had no one to share it with. The snowman ended up lopsided, with mismatched buttons and a carrot nose that kept falling off. It was the most beautiful thing Mason had ever built. Perfect, Emma declared, stepping back to admire their work. Definitely perfect, Ethan agreed, and as snow continued to fall on their small backyard in Brooklyn, on this family that had found each other in the most unlikely way, Mason understood what his mother had tried to tell him years ago. Real wealth wasn't measured in what you owned. It was measured in who was waiting for you at home. In small hands reaching for yours in the dark. In promises kept instead of broken. In choosing presence over profit, love over legacy. In the end, Emma hadn't just found him on a snowy sidewalk and asked for help. She'd found him in the middle of his carefully constructed life and shown him what he was missing. And Mason had finally been smart enough to listen.